Good afternoon. On behalf of Faith in Public Life, we are glad that you're here. This is such a momentous and historic day. So much is happening in our country. My name is Reverend Susan Smith. I am with the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, and I also am with Crazy Faith Ministries here in Columbus, Ohio. And all of us are reeling. We've been reeling really for the past year, ever since the horrendous killing of George Floyd by the Minneapolis police officer, Derek Chauvin, who has been convicted. We have been reeling. It has been hard to watch and hard to deal with, and even hard to watch the trial and to wait for the verdict. But we have done it. We have gotten through that part of this experience. We have much more to do. Today, Faith in Public Life has gathered some faith leaders from around the country to talk about the verdict, to talk about Black Lives Matter, the movement, why it's important, and the craziness, I guess, of some calling it a terrorist organization. We're also here today to talk about or to mention the fact that these police shootings against Black people, they're not letting up. Just yesterday, as we awaited the verdict, or as we were listening to the verdict from the Chauvin trial, we got news in Columbus that a 15-year-old girl had been shot by a police officer here. And within seconds, this girl, Ma'Khia Bryant, was shot and she was killed. It doesn't end. It doesn't end. And so the country has a collective grief and a collective anger that we have to deal with. And it really is incumbent upon faith leaders to help make things make sense. This is a moral dilemma. People say that it's about politics. Yes, it's about politics, but it's also about morality. And the faith leaders, we are charged with trying to make morality work, make morality mean something to people, make it mean more than politics or guns or the Second Amendment or any of that. And so we are all honored to be here, having been invited by Faith in Public Life. And the faith leaders that you will hear from I'm hoping will stimulate you to think about what you can do, because everybody has a part to play. Everybody has something to do. In addition to the faith leaders, just, plain out faith leaders, we have a faith leader who's also the mother of a young man who was killed by police here in Columbus, Ohio. And so she speaks to us. She will speak to us from her perspective as a mother who did not get justice in what happened to the police officer who shot her son, and also her work going forward as she deals with all that she has to deal with as a mother and as a faith leader. So we will. We have some faith leaders here. We have Adrienne Hood, we have Dr. Jacqui Lewis, we have Reverend Tracy Blackman, we have Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg, Reverend Pastor Reginald Gundy, Rabbi Jason Kimelman. And so we are going to take them in order. As I call their names, they will just come and speak for our leaders. They each have 5 minutes to talk, and we're just going to move right through it. If you have questions, I guess you can type them someplace. I don't know where you type them, but we will try to answer them. And also, if there are members here of the press, if you want to get in touch with any of the speakers, you can do that by going to organizing at faithinpubliclife.org. Organizing at faithinpubliclife.org. You can get in touch with them to have interview requests of any of the speakers. That's how you do it. So we're going to do this thing. We're going to move forward on this day where we are reeling between, the very best of times and the worst of times, trying to make sense out of nonsense. Our first speaker will be Reverend Miss Adrienne Hood, who is the mother of Henry Green. She is from Columbus, Ohio, and she represents True Love Ministries. Adrienne.
Hello, Reverend Sue, and thank you, Faith in Public Life, for the invitation to not only share my son's story, but hopefully also to encourage individuals to get involved, because we are all needed. So my story here in this space started almost 5 years ago. I became a member of what I call the Involuntary Club, and that was June 6th of 2016. My son, Henry Green V, was gunned down by two plainclothes police officers in an unmarked vehicle on a really beautiful summer day. And so from that day forward, I have been fighting I don't like to use the term justice only because justice for me would be having my son back. So I always say I am fighting for accountability. And it has been a long 5 years. And I have learned so many things about the system in and of itself that quite honestly beforehand I was naive to. Um, but I have been involved in the community, advocating not only for my son, but I have another son, I have a brother, I have a grandson, and I have a whole community that I truly love. And I want it to be a safe place for all of them, for all of us, as it should be. And so, um, two plainclothes police officers killed my son. The grand jury did not indict them, which was to be expected, unfortunately. Um, we filed a wrongful death lawsuit. It was dismissed by the first judge, and we appealed and won. So, prayerfully, we will be going to court in November to continue to advocate for the accountability for my son. And with all of that, I have met some really wonderful people who have come and stood beside me, have encouraged and pushed me forward when times when I did not want to continue. And I am so appreciative of that. Um, but there are a lot of things that we can do collectively as a community to get the accountability that we are looking for. I have always known, since being in this space, I should say, about qualified immunity. Here of late, it has become a common term amongst many advocates in many communities. And qualified immunity is actually the barrier that keeps us as individuals from filing civil lawsuits against law enforcement, and not just law enforcement, but public officials altogether. I did do a TED talk on this back in October, and was able to share a lot of information about the obstacles and the barriers for the community, but are definitely beneficial for law enforcement. And those are the things that we have to continue to challenge our elected officials about changing. And we also have to challenge our elected officials to push back against the FOP contract, which is the Fraternal Order of Police, which is the union that represents police officers in many of the cities across our nation. So there's a lot of work for us to do, but we definitely can do this work together. I am currently on the board of an organization that was started here in Ohio called Ohio Families Unite Against Police Brutality. And we go from city to city and just help individuals advocate for their loved ones. And we try to walk them through the steps of what to expect and how to do the things that are necessary for them to be involved. And like I said, as a community, though, we all can put our hands on deck because we should not have to advocate for the humanness of our loved ones in any situation. And so it is very important for policies to be changed because one thing is for sure, the heart of men oftentimes will not and does not change if there is no policy and no morals pushing it. So I just look forward to continuing to build the relationships that I have thus far. I look forward to continuing to encourage the community to get involved and to stay engaged. The important thing is staying engaged, because we have to see this through. We oftentimes pick up the baton and we drop it without passing it on, and that has, in many ways, allowed us to be where we are in this space and time. Um, Systemic racism is very true, it's very alive, and we have a responsibility, not just as not just as people in the community, but we as the church, the body, we should be leading the charge for these changes. And I just look forward again to building those relationships and moving forward with the changes that are necessary, so that we can have the safety in all communities, not just some, but all. So I thank you for your time and appreciate the opportunity to be here and share my story. God bless you.
Thank you, Adrienne. And Adrienne is just one of so many mothers or parents who suffer not only from the loss of their loved one, but from the anger or the frustration and the pain that comes from not being able to get justice. Every human being wants justice. And so we lift up Adrienne and all the other parents who are going through what she has been going through for the past 5 years. Our next speaker is the Reverend Jacqui Lewis. She is the pastor, the Reverend Dr. Jacqui Lewis. She is the pastor of Middle Collegiate Church in New York. For those of you who follow her on Twitter or follow her period, you know that Middle Collegiate had a fire not so long ago. And I lift that up because we need to be in support of the efforts to get that church back up and running. But Reverend Jacqui is a light in this world, and we turn it over to her right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Sue. I'm so glad to be with you all today. Thank you, everyone, for coming to spend this time with us. Wherever two or more gathered, I really believe God's Spirit is with us. I'm praying today prayers of thanksgiving for a 17-year-old whose recording of a horrific incident goes viral, and we come to see the tragic death of George Floyd, and we come to be outraged, and the globe prays, acts, moves. There is an arrest, there is an arraignment, there is a conviction. Thanks be to God that the moral arc of the universe bent a little bit more toward accountability. We know that justice would be George Floyd alive. We know justice for all of the moms, dads, uncles, titis, aunties, the people who've lost loved ones to gun violence in this country, and particularly at the hand of the state. I'm praying for you that you will feel also a movement in the universe toward accountability for your lost loved one. I've been thinking a lot the last few days, friends, about God's dream for the world. I'm a faith leader, of course. I happen to be a Christian clergy who happens to be a universalist and believes that God speaks more than one language. But it is ubiquitous in all of our religions to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. It's a broad stroked, don't do anything to another that you wouldn't want to have done to you. Don't withhold from another what you wouldn't want to be withheld from you. Love your neighbor as yourself is like a ubiquitous calling across our faiths. And when I think about God's dream, I think about a little book in the Hebrew scriptures in Zechariah. And there's a description for post-exilic, post-trauma, post-traumatic stress, Babylonian captive, returned home Israel, that says simply, God says, I will return to Zion and I will dwell in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem will be called the faithful city, and the mountain of the Lord will be called the holy mountain. And once again, men and women of ripe old age will sit in the streets of Jerusalem, each with cane in hand because of their age, and the city streets will be filled with boys and girls playing there. I like to interpret scripture for the modern time. I'm thinking about old men and women sitting on the porches, like would have happened in all of our towns, urban America, and like sitting on the porches, rocking and talking and drinking some iced tea and watching the children play. And they're not afraid of stray gun bullets, and they're not afraid of violence. They're not afraid that someone's going to call the police on a loved one who's having a mental health issue and then suddenly there's going to be a dead body. No, they believe that love will win and they love one another into healing. And this is God's dream for us. So I want to tell you today, I'm not dreaming. I'm not dreaming of police officers convicted when they murder our people. I'm dreaming that old Black folks will live to tell the stories to their great-grandchildren of a new America that we built together. I'm dreaming that everybody who's outraged takes to the streets, and that might mean to the polls, that might mean to social media, that might mean running for office, that might mean running for city council, that might mean working in the schools with your kids. We are responsible. We are the ones we've been waiting for. And decades, centuries of death at the hands of the police who used to be the slave patrol, this is what we find ourselves living with. And if we, people of faith, are going to sync up with God's dream, then we have to sync up for the sanctity of life. And we have to sync up for reforming policing. We have to sync up for demilitarizing policing. We have to defund police departments that value death instead of life. And we can't be afraid to talk about it. When we get to the back end of a dead body and we're talking about justice and accountability, it's too late. We have to talk about city budgets. We have to talk about what other kinds of systems we're going to put in place. We have to talk about social work when there's mental illness. We have to talk about training police to de-escalate. And we have to hold our communities accountable for creating the world that we want. I'm dreaming God's dream. Not jail time for police who kill. Not only that, but yes, that, and a reframed understanding for what it means for there to be safe making, way making, love in the world, care given for communities by the police we hire. And we who believe in freedom should not resort to violence, but we cannot rest until freedom comes. That's my prayer. Let's do this together. May it be so.
Thank you, Reverend Jacqui. One of the things that Reverend Jacqui makes me think of is if you listen to the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference prayer, we do a prayer. We've been doing a prayer every morning for a year since the pandemic hit. But one of the things that we lift up is the South African Zulu word, Salbonani, which means we see you, we respect you, we honor you, you are important to us. And I think that as Reverend Jacqui was talking, it made me understand even more how much we have to communicate that message to each other. And in communicating that with each other and working for some common goals, remind each other that we have power and that we have power together. We all matter to each other and we all matter to God. Thank you so much, Reverend Jacqui. Our next speaker is Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg.
Hi.
Hi.
After the verdict came out yesterday, I saw a few of my rabbinic colleagues who were posting on social media, quoting Deuteronomy 16:20, which is a favorite in the Jewish community. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue. And they were posting it approvingly, noting that they felt in some way that the verdict had achieved that measure, that we had done right by that verse, that we had pursued justice and maybe even caught it. Except that that's not right. It doesn't make any sense in context. When you look at the context of the verse in Deuteronomy, you see that the lines just before it talk not just about basic accountability for one racist cop who was caught on video murdering a man, whose lynching video went viral, who ignited the whole world and forced the most baseline measures of accountability to be taken. The verses talk about setting up just systems, appointing magistrates and officials who govern all the people with due justice, not judging unfairly, ever, showing no partiality, no bias, whether implicit or explicit, ever, taking no bribes, and presumably, I think the Torah would assume, planting no toy guns on slain children, planting no drugs on people in traffic stops, not shooting children who have their hands in the air complying with orders, not shooting children in distress who call for help, not shooting people reaching for their car registration, not shooting disabled people, no extrajudicial murders of any kind ever, whether complying or not complying, standing still or walking away, under no circumstances. The verses in Deuteronomy command us not just to issue a verdict when the bar for accountability is on the floor, is in the basement, is deep in the molten core of the earth, but to set up systems of justice that are just for everybody all of the time. We must eradicate white supremacy from every corner of our society. We must set up systems that include calling for domestic violence specialists to address domestic violence, calling for those with training in de-escalation to de-escalate, and creating a sea change in how we think about and address addiction, mental illness, and so many other issues. Asking what is a whole society and what does it look like to create a society in which people are really, truly, actually protected, in which their needs are served, truly served. We know that all of our broken systems are intertwined, and they're all poisoned by white supremacy. Systems of policing, systems of incarceration, the education system that feeds the school to prison pipeline, the way systemic racism is connected to our healthcare, to our ability to get clean drinking water in America, right? At the National Council of Jewish Women, we fight for the safety, rights, and flourishing of women, children, and families. And we fight for a world where people can move through it in wholeness and not in terror. We must not rest until we can hear the commandment to create not only systems that periodically offer up appropriate measures of baseline accountability, but systems that are truly just from the inside out. So I'd like to invite us all to take up Reverend Lewis's charge, right? To sync up our dream for a better future with God's dream and to help bridge that gap by taking action, right? To donate, to march, to call our elected officials, to run for something, to get involved, and to remember that this change has to happen on every single level of our society. The Board of Education, the local city level, the state, the national, every single, in all of our institutions, everywhere we are, we need the work to be done. And the obligation is on every single one of us to be part of this work.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rabbi Ruttenberg. And I neglected to say when I was introducing her that she is with the National Council of Jewish Women. But she lifts up the fact that we do have a lot of work to do. You know, the nation is sick. White supremacy, I think, is an illness. It is an illness. And we have, if we don't admit it as a nation, which we don't, nobody wants to talk about it. Like the R word is a bad word. If you call somebody racist, then they get all mad. But you know what? It's like having an illness. If you're an alcoholic and somebody calls you an alcoholic, you get mad. But you don't get healed until you admit that you are an alcoholic. This country has to admit that it has a problem. And then we can begin the healing process, which then releases us to be the power that we are, and releases the potential and the possibilities for us changing some of the stuff that is tearing our country apart. So I appreciate what you said, Rabbi Ruttenberg. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Reverend R.L. Gundy. He's a friend of mine. He is the pastor of Mount Sinai Baptist Church in Florida. Reverend Gundy.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me into this conference. I first want to address the issue that yesterday was a historical moment for our country. And we are deeply grateful for the accountability that has come. We thank Keith Ellison for his masterful work and his team in ensuring accountability in this case, and for the way in which the conscience of a nation was awakened by this tragedy. However, legislative law without moral and ethical accountability fails the biblical principles of God's written word or any divine written word that expresses love rather than hate. Our legislative bodies across this country is legislating laws that support policing, that support systemic racism. That is just a fact. Now, the moral act of justice has a beginning of love, but it also has an ending of love. Now, from the moment the world first saw the searing images of George Floyd's brutal murder, it was clear that no outcome other than the conviction of this killer would provide accountability. But at the same time, we know nothing will bring back Brother George Floyd, and that's why, as a nation, we need to do everything possible to create policies that will save lives and prevent police killings from happening in the first place. So we need a call for the federal investigations into a broader problems of police abuse and systemic racism that led to the case in Minneapolis, as well as continuing problems in nearby communities like Brooklyn Center, as well as communities around the nation. We can never change our streets from battlegrounds to playgrounds without the love of God, without just laws. So let me amplify this for a moment. The work doesn't stop here. Our hearts are heavy for George Floyd's family and families of victims of police violence all across this country and even in the world. Nothing will bring back George Floyd, and that's why as a nation we need to do everything possible to create these policies that are needed. But we must continue to confront injustice for every family who has had to suffer the heartbreaking disappointments of a failed system that continues time and time again to deny their humanity. Let me say this to you. The case in Florida, for instance, are off the chart when it comes to this killing that's been going on around the nation. Hundreds of people have been publicly lynched in the state of Florida, and they have been supported by legislative nightmares and even fraternal order of police, money, and endorsements. Nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to go after the fraternal order of police, who has a lot to do with supporting these police officers and not holding them accountable. We must do the hard work of fundamentally changing policing at the local level, which is happening across the country from state level to truly innovative actions in cities like Ithaca, New York, Jacksonville, Florida, anywhere. But I'll give you an example. Our sheriff refuses to allow independent investigations on any shootings or murders that take place in this city or county. As a matter of fact, they have legislated a law in the state of Florida that don't allow you to have citizen review boards. It's really mind-boggling why, on one hand, you say that justice is available for everybody, but your policies dictate something else. This is not totally about politics. For centuries, a system of white supremacy has killed Black people and brown people with impunity, what I refer to as vicious racism by vicious racists. Change demands full accountability of our hearts and souls to rooting out systemic racism in our justice system. I appreciate Rabbi for talking about Deuteronomy 16, and she was definitely on point. It sets up a justice system for people to administer justice equally and fairly. So I challenge those who are in the religious system, who are supporting the judicial system and supporting the political system. I challenge whether you serve the same God that I serve. Because if you are not standing up and demanding that things change, that means you're supporting what they're doing. Let me move to close. We have both the tools to do it with consent decrees and re-engage Justice Department to investigate our police misconduct. The pursuit of justice does not stop here. We must pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act at the federal level, which will not solve every problem, but it's a great start. Getting the right people into the right jobs at the Justice Department is also essential. Confirming civil rights advocates like Vanita Gupta and Kristen Clark to the roles in the Department of Justice will definitely help bring things about to bring a positive change. So I want to say to you that I want to thank you for allowing me to be in here, but we have a long way to go. And just yesterday, they passed a House Bill 1 in Florida that minimizes the amount of protesting that you can do in the street. I challenge faith leaders to pick up your cross, put it on your shoulder, and walk down the middle of your street and dare them to arrest you. Because what the laws that they are passing now is really infringing upon our First Amendment rights. So God bless you and thank you for listening. And I certainly hope and pray that we continue to work together to move forward.
Thank you, Pastor Gundy. And you're exactly right. When they're talking, I just listen sometimes and shake my head. There's so much hoopla about wanting to save and protect the Second Amendment, but these people are passing laws that are a direct violation of our First Amendment rights. And if we as moral faith leaders don't lift it up, nobody will. So we do have an obligation. We had a rally a couple of weeks ago in Columbus, and they're making those same types of laws here in Ohio. And, you could be arrested for, writing on the sidewalk with chalk, or you could be arrested for blocking a sidewalk. And I said to them that maybe, people need to just be prepared to be arrested. We cannot stand back and let people who want to take our First Amendment rights take them away. We owe it to ourselves. We owe it to the people who look up to us. So thank you so much. Our next speaker is the Reverend James Woodall. He is the president of the Georgia NAACP.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I want to start by saying this, that I believe that God is angry right now in this moment. While thousands upon thousands and millions upon millions of people celebrated a verdict within a very criminal and unjust justice legal system, I believe that God is angry because, as the prophet Ezekiel in chapter 22 says, is that the leaders or the priests, the leaders among us, the people, became desperate, like roaring, ravaging lions, ravaging and killing indiscriminately. The priests are violating the law and desecrate God's holy things. Preachers cover up for these politicians, and extortion is rife. Robbery is epidemic. The poor and the needy are being abused. The refugee, the immigrant being kicked around at will with no access to justice. God says, I look for somebody to stand in the gap against all of this, and I cannot find a single soul. And so in the midst of a moment where people celebrate a verdict that sends a man to prison for what could very well be the rest of his natural born life, they celebrate. But in the very same breath, we see that the words of George Floyd continues to holler out in the memory of all of our minds. 3 single words that I believe become a sign of righteous indignation. Words that reflect simply, I can't breathe. And I hear the same words that my grandmother used to sing from the psalm that says, let everything that has breath praise ye the Lord. And like George Floyd and like Mike Brown and like Trayvon Martin and Breonna Taylor and Alexia Christian and Oscar Grant, and now even Matthew Zadake Williams, who was killed just a week ago here in DeKalb County of Georgia, a name that means justice, of righteousness. And now his family begins to grieve and to prepare for his committing to the ground. So again, while everybody celebrates, I still hear the very voice of God saying, I am angry because there has now been a death to justice. There has now been black blood drained in our streets. Yet again, there still is people whose entire lives are being poured out into our streets. The very earth that God would take God's very breath and put the very soul of life into is the very life that we are literally destroying every single day. The police practices and the white supremacist institutions are continuing to allow the kind of violence that we see drain our lives of love, of justice, of righteousness, and puts us into a darkness of despair that only God can heal. And so, yes, this may be a good moment as relates to this particular case, but yet there's thousands upon thousands of other cases have yet to go unsolved. We still have families grieving. We still have lives that have yet to be valued, to see their kind of justice. And so therefore we cannot celebrate nor stop here. The other reason I believe that God is angry is because white supremacy continues to thrive on black blood. It continues to allow the kind of death that we see on the news and in our communities every single day at the hands of people who are called to protect and serve. And so yet, instead of us being able to have confidence in a legal system that supposedly is supposed to have no permanent friends or permanent enemies, only the permanent interest, and that's the establishment of justice, we still have yet to see that come into practice every single day. Just yesterday, as the verdict was being read, yet another life was lost. A 15-year-old young lady in Columbus, Ohio. Another murder, another family loss, another community grieving. That is not justice. That is not a step in the right direction. In fact, it is getting worse. Again, here in Georgia, just last year, we saw 96 officer-involved shootings. In comparison, the year before was about 84. And this year, we're prepared to top that even more. What we have is a white supremacy problem. This problem is not just about black officers and white police officers in black communities, but this is about the rulers in dark places and high places, the darknesses of this world. This is about spirits literally warring with us to be able to stop what God had created and called good, to be able to take the very life out of our bodies and allow for there to be violence and darkness and destruction all around us. But I genuinely believe that there is a better way. And I know that there's a better way because I know that there is a Redeemer that still lives here today, and that Redeemer shall stand at the latter day of the earth. And though after this body is dead and gone and that the worms destroy this body, yet in our flesh we shall see God. And so that is where we lie our hope and place our faith in, is that the God of justice, the God of our blackness, the God of our humanity is still with us today, fighting alongside us, saying that there is yet another way, that we can be able to go down the corridors of glory and see a world that is able to exist not in violence but in love, to see a community that's bounded together in heritage and in culture and not have to struggle and suffer because that they were black and others were not, that we can all live together, that we can all live in peace and in love and in justice, because that is what God looks like. That is what our humanity declares. That is what the very breath of life promises each and every one of us. And so I stand here today, not only declaring that we need to find a better way to police our communities, but we need to find a better way to live within our communities, because that is the promise that God has called each and every one of us into. And so I leave here with that simple declaration that, yes, everything that has birth, praise the Lord. But right now, our job is to stop the suffocation and the death from taking the very breath out of our bodies, and to show that there is a way that God can be reflective of each and every one of us here. And so I thank you. I thank those who are standing on the wall and refusing to come down. I thank those who have been in this struggle for years upon years and who have seen generation after generation fight this fight. But we still have much work to do. And only when we do it together will we be successful and will we overcome.
Thank you so much, Reverend Woodall. And you're right, we have to do it together. And the statement that, many organizations, NAACP, different organizations put out statements yesterday after the verdict. I heard a lot of people saying, oh, everything is fine. It was like people said that this was a post-racial society after Barack Obama was elected. And I thought, no, that's not. The work hasn't ended. The work is just beginning. This is one case. But with this verdict, with the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference put out a statement, and part of it said this verdict reinforces the need for our collective voices to respond, which is what Reverend Woodall was just saying. This is a thing that we have to do as Baptists and Methodists and Jews and Muslims and old people and LGBTQIA. We have to form a collective of people who want democracy, who love God, who want justice. This is not time for us to sit in our little silos and be alone and or think that just because there was a verdict yesterday that many of us agreed with, that means that the struggle is over. No, a luta continua. The struggle continues and will continue to continue. Our next speaker is Rabbi Jason Kimelman-Block, and he is with the Bend the Ark Jewish Action. And before he comes forward, I just want to read a statement that Rabbi Abraham Heschel gave, one of my favorite persons. Heschel said that, morally speaking, there is no limit to the concern one should feel for the suffering of human beings, that indifference to evil is worse than evil itself, that in a free society, some are guilty, but all are responsible. Rabbi Kimelman-Block.
Thank you for that, and thank you to all my colleagues who spoke so beautifully this afternoon. I speak to you today as part of a diverse Jewish community that includes Black Jews, includes Latino Jews, European Jews, African Jews, Persian Jews, queer and trans Jews, Jews with disabilities. Our Jewish community is committed to Black lives and Black liberation. And we call for our Jewish community, especially white Jews, to rise up for Black lives using all of our intellectual, our political, and spiritual resources. Following yesterday's verdict, I've been thinking a lot about the Jewish concept of teshuvah, which means repentance. The Hebrew word comes from shuv, which is to return to the way that we should be after we have strayed. And the Jewish tradition teaches that the process of teshuvah does not come easy. And it's not just a simple, even asking God for forgiveness. You can ask God for atonement for wrongs that you commit in the ritual space. But when you commit a wrong against a human being, another person, you actually do not ask for atonement from God. You ask it from the person that you have wronged. If you've stolen from them or if you've injured them, you must pay them restitution and you must seek forgiveness from them, the person you have wronged themselves. But for murder, forgiveness is elusive and ultimately impossible because the victim themselves cannot be made whole or ask for forgiveness because they are gone. Yesterday's verdict does not change the fact that George Floyd no longer walks this earth, while Derek Chauvin still has his life. But the teshuvah, the repentance that is most needed right now is not from an individual police officer as much as it is about a teshuvah, a repentance that is needed for our society. The teshuvah that America is called on to make is about how it has and continues to treat Black bodies. For centuries, infinitely precious Black human beings created in the divine image have been enslaved, dehumanized, disenfranchised, and murdered with the permission and encouragement of a false god, the idolatry of white supremacy. That idolatry is so voracious that even as the country stood still yesterday afternoon, waiting for the verdict, police in Columbus continued business as usual and killed yet another teenager, Michaela Bryant. It's such a part of everyday life in this society That last year, 121 people were killed by police after being stopped for a simple traffic violation. Why are police even involved in traffic violations if it is that deadly? And these people have names. Specifically thinking about ones that people who died at the hands of police just from traffic stops. People like Dante Wright just a few weeks ago, Sandra Bland, Philando Castile. And while there may be accountability for Derek Chauvin, there can be no justice as long as this racist system of police violence continues to exist. Let us not be misled by this verdict to believe that things are improving. We must acknowledge that the reform attempts of the last few years have failed to end police harassment of Black communities, have failed to prevent lethal violence, or get to the heart of the structural racism that buoys these systems, and cannot be undone by yet more incremental reforms. True teshuvah, repentance for the United States, must begin with rethinking how this society spends our public money. We must focus on reducing policing and expanding community services. We must pass legislation such as the Breathe Act to divest from policing and invest in healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities while centering the protection of Black lives. Across the country, the promise of a liberated future is being called into being by Black organizers and activists. Thousands of Americans, young and old, of all races and ethnicities, are calling for justice, and a more just America is struggling to be born. Let us make it so.
Thank you, Rabbi Kimelman-Block. I so appreciate it. And you know something, as you were talking about the teshuvah, I remember a story, because here's the thing. God created all of us. God cares about all of us. And for some reason, when you were talking, I was thinking about how people cry out, all lives matter. That is the absolute truth. All lives do matter to God. And there is a story from the Jewish tradition where the Israelites were rejoicing after the Egyptians tried to pass through the Sea of Reeds, and the water overtook them and drowned them. And the Israelites were joyful. They were so happy their enemy was being swallowed up. And God stopped them. Yahweh stopped them and said, don't. I love them too. They're my children too. So all lives do matter. And we have to deal with that. And we also, though, have to deal with our desire to see the people who have hurt us, who have made white supremacy as putrid and as toxic as it is. And so I tell people, when you get mad at folks and you want something happened to them, go to Psalm 35 and say, contend, O Lord, with those who contend with me. Let God do it. But in the meantime, we are called to protect the lives of all people, especially the lives of Black people whose lives have never mattered in this country. So thank you so much. Our last speaker is Rev. Jen Butler, and she's going to do a recorded statement. She is a giant in what she does, and she gives us messages and hope and inspiration. So I'm going to be quiet, and we're going to listen to the message from Rev. Jen Butler, the founder and executive director of Faith in Public Life.
I'm the Reverend Jennifer Butler. I'm the CEO of Faith in Public Life, and I'm a Presbyterian pastor. Christians are celebrating the season of Eastertide, and yet it seems like we are still in the darkness of the tomb. I am so grateful for the verdict yesterday, which affirms George Floyd's fundamental dignity and hopefully brings a small measure of relief to his family. But we all know that this isn't real justice. Justice would be George Floyd still alive and hugging his children. Justice would be a policing and criminal justice system that Black families can believe will serve them as well as it serves others. Justice would be communities that Black people can simply exist in without fear. Black lives matter to God, and they must matter to our government. As a pastor and as a Christian, I believe in justice, equality, and dignity, and I want to build a nation where every Black person can thrive, a nation of justice for all. As a guilty verdict was announced in the trial last night, And as a new presidency gets underway, it would be easy for white folks and white churches to forget the pain of 2020 and to act as though resurrection has already happened. But we cannot afford to move on while the white supremacy and Christian nationalism grinds the children of God to dust and kills people like George Floyd. We could simply in this moment proclaim, we are healed, he is risen, hallelujah. But on another level, we know that we are not healed. Even as the trial was underway, we witnessed more acts of police brutality against unarmed people of color. And even as it concluded, 16-year-old Ma'Khia Bryant was shot and killed by police in Columbus, Ohio. This week, I found myself wanting to protect myself from the pain. I realized that I have the luxury of doing so as a white person. I could avert my eyes and move on if I so chose. But I was reading Black theologian Dr. Shaniqua Walker Barnes, her prayer for a weary Black woman this week. Dr. Shaniqua's prayer is certainly striking. It reminds me of King David in the Psalms railing against his enemies. She begins with these poignant words, Lord, help me to hate white people. Those are harsh and startling words to hear. I pushed myself to hear her lament. She goes on, it is not the white supremacist militants I most want to be able to hate. It is instead those who welcome Black people in their churches, but brand us as heretics if we suggest that Christianity is concerned about the oppressed. And it is the white people who claim to be progressive, but whose unexamined racism bubbles up when I least expect it. She prays, spare me, O Lord, from their gaslighting, white mansplaining, and white woman tears. These are hard words for white folks to hear, including myself, and indeed, there were white Christians attacking her and critical race theory on Twitter last week, even as more people of color died from police brutality. White people, white churches, this is a word for all of us. Can we open our eyes to Black realities? Can we stay present with the pain, even though we might otherwise safely hide in the upper room? Every white congregation and community needs to address white supremacy within ourselves and within our society. We cannot be complacent at such a time as this, and we cannot be oblivious. We must wake up and act to bring about God's vision of resurrection in our country so that we might become a nation of justice for all.
Thank you, Reverend Jen. Thank you so much. And I want to thank all of the participants who were with us this afternoon. Miss Adrienne Hood, Reverend Dr. Jacqui Lewis, Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg, Reverend Reginald Gundy, Reverend James Woodall, and Reverend Dr. I just missed one, I'm sorry, and Reverend Dr. Jennifer Butler. Thank you all so much for being here. And as we sign off, I just want to remind us that in a lot of traditions, I can remember when I was growing up, somebody in the church said, oh, if you believe in Jesus, you're not supposed to be angry. Put that away. If you've ever heard that, anger is justified and it's merited. And anger can push us to do what we don't want to do. Anger can push us past complacency to action. Anger can give us courage that we wouldn't normally have. We are supposed to be angry if we're not being treated as human beings. That's all of us. And so let your anger come. Let it be used by God in order to bring about the change and the justice that all of us deserve. And why do we deserve it? Because we were all created by God. And when God created us, God said it was good. It was, and it is good. At this time, I ache for the family of Ma'Khia Bryant. I ache for the families of all of these young people who have been killed by police with no justice. But I yearn and believe in and will hope in that our anger will ignite the fire within us to do the work and the will of God as moral leaders. God bless you and thank you so much. And this is my cat.